My family took a vote to erase me. Funny how quiet it got when I stopped begging to stay. So apparently, my family had a meeting about me. And guess what? I wasn't invited. I found out the hard way by walking into my own house one Friday evening and realizing my room didn't exist anymore. Like literally, gone. The bed I'd had since college? Gone. My books, my photo frames, the little lamp I fixed when Mom said it was too old to bother with? All gone. What replaced it was my younger sister, Ruby, asleep in my bed, drooling on my pillow like she'd paid rent her whole life. For a second, I honestly thought I walked into the wrong house. The silence hit first. No TV noise, no smell of Dad's burnt coffee, just that eerie, heavy kind of quiet that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. I called out, "Mom?" Nothing, just the faint sound of Ruby's snoring. When I stepped into the kitchen, Mom was unpacking groceries, completely unfazed, like she hadn't just erased 30 years of my existence. She didn't even look at me when she said it. "Lena, we had a family meeting. We've decided it's time for you to move out." I laughed. I actually laughed because what else do you do when your mother talks like she's firing you from your own home? "Move out? Mom, I just paid the property tax last week. Again." She didn't flinch. "You're 30, it's time you got your own place." Translation, "We're done using you. You can go now." See, I've been the financial backbone of the Carter household since Dad's business went under 3 years ago. I covered the mortgage, the car payments, Ruby's student loans, even Mom's emergency spa treatments, which somehow happened every other month. And I didn't mind, at least not at first. I told myself that's what family does. We hold each other up, except in my family, holding each other up apparently meant Lena holds everyone while they kick her ribs in. Standing there, I could feel my chest tighten. "You're serious?" Mom finally turned, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "We took a vote. It's unanimous." That line, "we took a vote," I swear it echoed in my head like a courtroom verdict. I wanted to scream, to remind her about the late nights I spent fixing the roof, the hours at work I traded for extra pay just to keep the lights on. But instead, I just stood there. Because that's what you do when you've been trained your whole life to be the responsible one. You go quiet, you take the hit. Ruby woke up halfway through the argument, all groggy and smug. "Oh, hey Lena, Mom said I can use your room for my makeup stuff. Cool, right?" Her tone was casual, like she was talking about swapping a Netflix password, not hijacking my space. I didn't answer her. I just stared at the spot where my old bookshelf used to be, where Dad's dusty trophies sat before he sold half of them on eBay for business expenses. I thought about the smell of fresh paint when I redid the walls myself, about the nights I fell asleep listening to the creak of the house I kept alive. And then something inside me just stopped caring. I walked to my closet, grabbed my old duffel bag, and started packing whatever they hadn't touched. A few shirts, my passport, my laptop, the charger I bought 3 times because Ruby kept borrowing it. Mom leaned on the counter, watching me like I was being dramatic. "You don't have to make a scene," she said flatly. I zipped the bag. "Don't worry, I won't." Dad wasn't home, probably at his poker nights, losing money he didn't have. I didn't even wait for him. I'd already spent years waiting for him to step up. He never did. As I reached the front door, Mom added, "We'll keep your mail here for a bit, till you figure yourself out." That line almost made me laugh again. Figure myself out? I'd been the one holding them together while they fell apart. Outside, the air felt different. Heavy but clean, like the weight I'd carried had finally shifted. Not gone, but moved somewhere I could breathe. I sat in my car, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the porch light that flickered because Dad never fixed it. I'd asked him a dozen times. He said, "Later." I realized later had been my whole life with them. So I drove. No destination, no plan, just away. The kind of away that doesn't care where it ends up, as long as it's not there. At the first red light, my phone buzzed. A text from Ruby. "Can you send me your Netflix login? Mine's not working." I stared at it for a long time, then laughed so hard it hurt. That was the moment I knew. They didn't just kick me out. They set me free. So I ended up sleeping in my car that first night. It wasn't the dramatic kind of homelessness you see in movies. No rain pouring down on the windshield, no tragic soundtrack. Just me, in a Walmart parking lot, staring at the glow of a 24-hour sign, trying to convince myself I wasn't completely falling apart. I had about $80 in my checking account, half a tank of gas, and a duffel bag full of wrinkled clothes. And the funniest part? I wasn't even angry yet. I was just empty, like someone had hit mute on my whole life. The next morning, I dragged myself to work. I manage small renovation projects, which basically means I'm the one yelling at subcontractors while trying to keep a half-collapsed house from turning into a lawsuit. My boss, Miles, noticed the bags under my eyes immediately. He's one of those quiet guys who sees too much and says too little. "Rough night?" he asked. I shrugged and said, "Got voted off the family island." He blinked, confused for half a second, then nodded like that somehow made perfect sense. Later that day, he sent me a text. "If you need a couch for a few days, I've got one. No questions asked." I read that message 3 times before I actually believed it. See, when you grow up in a house where every favor has strings attached, genuine kindness feels suspicious. But I went. His apartment was small, clean, and smelled like coffee and cedarwood. There was a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Blankets are clean, food in the fridge, sleep well." I sat there for a long time just staring at that note, realizing how foreign it felt to be helped without being guilt-tripped for it. The first few days at Miles's place were quiet. Too quiet, honestly. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted, expecting a text from Mom saying something like, "You forgot to pay the water bill again." But no one called, no one texted. It was like I'd been erased, which would have hurt more if it didn't also feel like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. I started keeping a small notebook, just to track what I'd been paying for over the years. Property taxes, the heating repair, the roof replacement, Ruby's college tuition, Dad's truck payments. I flipped through old emails, receipts, bank statements. The numbers didn't just add up, they screamed. For years, I hadn't been the daughter who helps out. I'd been their personal ATM with a pulse. One night, Miles came home to find me surrounded by papers on the floor, laptop open, receipts everywhere. He leaned on the doorframe. "You starting a conspiracy board or something?" I laughed. "Nah, just documenting my stupidity." He didn't push. He just handed me a cup of coffee and said, "At least it's organized stupidity." That made me smile for the first time in weeks. The thing about silence is, it's addictive once you realize it doesn't always mean rejection. Sometimes it's peace disguised as nothing. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of birds instead of Mom's voice yelling through the hallway. I'd cook my own breakfast without someone accidentally finishing my coffee creamer. I went to work, I fixed houses, I fixed my mind. Then one afternoon, I got a voicemail from Ruby. Her voice was dripping with fake cheer. "Hey, Lena, Mom says the internet got shut off. You probably forgot to pay it. Can you just Venmo her the usual?" I almost dropped my phone from laughing. The usual, that was their default setting, assuming I'd handle everything. I didn't even reply. Instead, I opened my banking app, went to autopay, and hit cancel on every single household bill. Electricity, gas, internet, water, boom. Just like that, I cut the umbilical cord. A week later, Mom called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying, "Lena, the electric company said your name isn't on the account anymore. Is this some kind of mistake?" "Yeah, Mom, a mistake called finally growing a spine." By the end of the month, I had a new routine. Work, gym, cook, sleep. Miles and I didn't talk much about my situation, but sometimes he'd catch me zoning out and say something simple like, "You seem lighter lately." And I was, because once you stop trying to earn love from people who never plan to give it, everything gets lighter. One Saturday morning, I went grocery shopping for the first time in forever without budgeting for 3 extra mouths. I bought fresh vegetables, a good bottle of wine, and a tiny plant for the windowsill. It sounds small, but that moment, standing at the checkout, paying for only my life, felt like taking back my last name. Still, late at night, the anger would sneak in, not the loud screaming kind, the quiet one, the how dare they kind. I'd replay Mom's face, that flat tone when she said, "We took a vote." I'd imagine Ruby sleeping in my bed, surrounded by things I bought, pretending she earned them. Some nights, I'd clench my fists and whisper, "You'll learn," not as a threat, more like a promise to myself that someday they'd understand what they lost. Then came the turning point. I was cleaning out my inbox when I stumbled across an email from the mortgage company. It said my automatic payments had been declined because account holder information was changed. Weird, I hadn't done that. I called, pretending to be casual, and the rep said, "Oh yes, Mrs. Carter updated it. She said her daughter moved out permanently, so she'd be handling things from now on." Something about that hit different, not anger, clarity. They hadn't just voted me out. They were rewriting the story to make it look like I'd abandoned them, like they were the victims. That's when I started my proof folder. Every bill, every transfer, every text where they'd asked for money. I labeled it evidence. Miles noticed me typing late that night. "You okay?" he asked. I looked up, smiled faintly. "Just fixing something that's been broken for a long time." He nodded. "You always were good at that." The truth is, I wasn't planning revenge yet. Not exactly. I just wanted to be prepared for the day they tried to drag my name through the mud again. And deep down, I knew that day would come. People like them don't apologize. They spin the narrative until you look like the villain. But this time, I wasn't playing their game. That's how I found peace. Not in forgiveness, not in closure, but in documentation. In knowing that when the truth came knocking, I'd have the receipts ready. And trust me, that knock was coming sooner than anyone expected. 3 months later, they finally called. Well, not just called, blew up my phone like I was still on their payroll. First, it was Ruby. "Hey, so, weird question. How do you turn the power back on when the bill's overdue?" Then Mom's voice followed, shaky and sugar-coated. "Lena, sweetheart, we might have made a mistake. Could we talk?" Funny how silence lasts until the lights go out. I didn't answer right away. I let their messages pile up like unpaid invoices. But after the 5th, "We need your help," I knew this wasn't about family. It was about desperation. When I finally picked up, Mom's voice cracked in that performative way she used whenever she wanted something. "Things have been hard, honey. The house needs repairs, your father's business." I cut her off. "You mean the same business I bailed out twice?" Dead air, then a sigh. "We just need a little help getting back on our feet." I took a breath, calm and surgical. "Fine, but I have conditions." She hesitated. "Conditions?" "You'll all meet me next Sunday. Everyone, Dad, Ruby, you, and you're going to read something for me. I rented a small community hall downtown, neutral ground, no nostalgia to weaponize." I emailed her the document that night. A 3-page statement of truth, every unpaid bill, every manipulation, every time they'd guilted me for saying no. At the top, I wrote in bold, "Read every word exactly as written, no edits, no excuses." When Sunday came, I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. I parked across the street and watched them shuffle inside, Mom in her pressed church dress, Ruby fidgeting with her phone, Dad looking like he hadn't slept in days. The room smelled like old coffee and fear. I sat down, nodded once. "Let's begin." Mom unfolded the paper. Her hands trembled slightly, her voice quiet at first. "We took advantage of our daughter, Lena Carter. We let her pay our bills, our debts, our mistakes. We called her dramatic when she asked for respect. We made her feel unwanted in the house she kept standing." She paused, eyes glistening, but I gave no reaction. "Keep going," I said. Her voice broke halfway through the 2nd page. Ruby went next, reading her part through clenched teeth. "I used Lena's money and her things, and still thought she was selfish. I took her room. I didn't care." Each word landed like a hammer, the silence between them heavier than any scream. When they finished, no one moved. Dad cleared his throat, muttered, "Is that enough for your little performance?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Almost." I slid a folder across the table. "This just came from the bank." He frowned, flipping it open, then froze. It was a loan agreement. $70,000 signed under my name. Except it wasn't my signature. It was his. Crooked, desperate, pathetic. "You used my credit," I said evenly. "You forged my name." Mom gasped. Ruby whispered, "Oh my God, Dad." He tried to speak, but I cut him off. "You didn't just betray me, you committed fraud. And I have everything, emails, timestamps, the notary record. You thought I wouldn't find out?" He slammed the folder shut. "You don't understand. I was trying to save the business. By destroying my future?" My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. Mom started crying, full soap opera tears. "We can fix this, Lena. We're family." I leaned back in my chair. "You had your vote, remember? This is mine." I stood up, gathered my things, and said, "The bank will be in touch, so will my lawyer." As I walked out, Ruby called after me, voice shaking. "You can't do this. You'll ruin us." I stopped at the door, turned slightly. "No, Ruby, you ruined me. I'm just evening the score." Then I left. That night, I sat on Miles's couch again, same spot where I'd cried months ago. Only this time, I wasn't broken. I was steady. He looked up from his sketch pad and asked, "You finally did it, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, and I didn't even have to raise my voice." He smiled, small but proud. That's the best kind of revenge, quiet and undeniable. 2 weeks later, the bank confirmed the fraud investigation. Their assets were frozen, the house flagged for foreclosure. Word got around our small town fast, neighbors whispering, church folks pretending to be shocked. But me, I slept like a baby. For the first time, justice didn't feel like fire. It felt like clean air. See, people think revenge is about destruction. It's not, it's about balance. It's about showing the ones who broke you that you can rebuild yourself and watch them crumble under the weight of their own lies. They taught me silence was weakness. Turns out, silence was strategy. A month after I turned everything over to the bank, it was like the whole Carter household collapsed overnight. Their company trucks disappeared from the driveway first, repoed. Then the for sale sign went up in front of the house I grew up in. I saw it by accident on my way to work. The same porch where Mom used to sip wine and lecture me about gratitude now had weeds growing through the cracks. I didn't feel joy, not exactly. It was more like watching a fire that had already burned out. You don't cheer, you just stand there, stunned by the silence afterward. Dad tried calling once. His voicemail started with that same disappointed tone he used whenever I questioned his decisions. You didn't have to go this far, Lena. We're family. I almost laughed. The way he said family sounded more like a curse than a bond. Mom sent a few emails too, apologies dressed up as justifications. Things like, we didn't mean to hurt you, we were just scared, or, you'll understand when you have kids of your own. That one got deleted the second I read it. Ruby didn't reach out at all, but I saw her posting old selfies online like nothing happened, captioned fresh start. The irony was painful and perfect. Meanwhile, my life started to feel like it finally belonged to me. I moved into a small condo by the river, nothing fancy, just mine. I painted the walls a soft gray, added some plants that I didn't immediately kill, and finally bought a couch that didn't have history attached to it. Miles helped me move. Halfway through carrying boxes, he joked, "You sure you don't want to keep any of the family antiques?" I grinned, sweaty and exhausted. "Yeah, I'm good. I've had enough ghosts in my life." He laughed, and for a second it didn't feel like trauma anymore. It felt like rebuilding. Work got better too. My boss offered me a lead position on a downtown renovation project. The kind of job that would have terrified me before, but now, it felt like the natural next step. When I told Miles, he just smiled and said, "See, told you you'd turn the wreckage into blueprints." He always had a way of making heavy things sound simple. But sometimes, at night, I'd catch myself thinking about them. Not with hatred, but curiosity. How do you live with that kind of guilt? How do you wake up every day knowing the person you took for granted doesn't hate you enough to come back, but also doesn't love you enough to check in? That's a strange kind of punishment. I didn't need to send karma their way. They were already living it. Then came the unexpected twist. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee near my new place, I ran into Mrs. Duncan, our old neighbor, sweet lady, always baked cookies that tasted like drywall but meant well. She looked startled to see me. "Lena, oh honey, I heard about everything. Your parents, well, it's been rough." I nodded politely, not sure where this was going. She leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing state secrets. "They've been staying in that old motel near the freeway. You know, the one with the flickering sign? It's so sad." I thanked her and left, but my stomach twisted all day. That night, I drove past that motel. I told myself it was just curiosity, closure maybe. But when I saw them sitting outside, eating takeout under that buzzing neon light, it hit me. This was their rock bottom. And I wasn't there to witness it as revenge. I was there as proof that I'd survived what they couldn't. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need to. I just sat for a minute, watching the woman who once told me I wasn't cut out for independence, now dependent on takeout coupons. The irony burned hot and cold at the same time. When I got home, Miles was waiting with takeout of his own. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, I saw them." He didn't ask for details. He just handed me a box of lo mein and said, "Then you know it's done." And he was right. It was done. The chapter didn't end with yelling or tears. Just quiet recognition that some things can't be rebuilt, no matter how good you are with tools. The funny thing is, people at work started noticing I was lighter, happier even. One of my coworkers said, "You've got this calm energy now, like you finally exhaled after holding your breath for years." I didn't correct him. That's exactly what it felt like. the tension, the guilt, the never-ending need to be enough. It all dissolved the moment I stopped asking them for closure and gave it to myself instead. Sometimes I drive by the river on my way home, windows down, music low. The water glitters in the sunset, and I think about how life can shift from chaos to peace without any fireworks. Just quiet choices stacking up until they build something stronger than revenge. That's what this was. Not payback, not victory, just balance. And maybe that's what growing up really means in America. Not proving you're right to the people who wronged you, but finally learning how to live without needing their approval. 6 months later, life looked nothing like the mess it used to be. The chaos was gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier. The kind of peace you don't realize you've been starving for until it finally shows up. I'd wake up to sunlight dripping through my curtains, coffee brewing, Miles humming off key in the kitchen, and this small voice in my head whispering, "You made it." It wasn't loud, it wasn't triumphant, just calm, like my life had finally stopped being a war zone. I never heard from my parents again after that motel sighting, not directly anyway. Every now and then, someone from our old neighborhood would send a vague update. Dad was picking up handyman jobs. Mom was volunteering at a thrift store. Ruby was back in community college. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. It was strange, though, realizing I didn't hate them anymore. I used to think forgiveness meant letting them off the hook. Turns out, it's just letting yourself off the leash. One morning, while driving to a new job site, I passed the street that led to my old house. My chest tightened out of habit, but curiosity won. I turned in. The house looked smaller now, the kind of small that happens when you finally grow past something. The paint was peeling, the lawn patchy, and the porch swing I'd fixed 3 summers ago hung broken again. But I didn't feel anger, just gratitude. That house had taught me everything I needed to know about boundaries, about love that comes with price tags, about the cost of peace. I parked for a moment, then whispered to myself, "You don't live there anymore." And that wasn't sadness. That was freedom. Later that week, Miles and I were sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights blink against the water. He passed me a beer and said, "You ever think about calling them?" I thought for a second, then shook my head. "No, not because I'm bitter, just because there's nothing left to say." He nodded. "Guess sometimes silence really is the last word." We sat there for a while, not talking, just breathing in the kind of quiet that once used to terrify me. Now it felt like home. Funny thing, people think revenge is the high point of stories like mine, but it wasn't. Revenge was just the doorway. What came after was the real story. The rebuilding, the learning to exist without anger as fuel. The slow realization that being the reliable one doesn't mean being the doormat, that you can be kind and have boundaries, that walking away doesn't make you heartless. It just means you finally value your peace more than their chaos. A few months later, I got an email from my old high school inviting alumni to speak at a career day. I almost ignored it, but something in me said yes. When I stood on that stage, looking at those kids, some already burdened by family pressure, some convinced they'd never measure up, I told them the truth. That sometimes the people who claim to love you will ask you to shrink so they can stay comfortable. And the bravest thing you'll ever do is say no. The room went silent. Then a girl in the back raised her hand and said, "But doesn't that make you the bad guy?" I smiled. "Maybe to them, but not to yourself. And that's who you live with every day." Afterward, one of the teachers came up to thank me. He said, "That story's gonna stick with them." I laughed softly. It stuck with me too. Driving home that night, windows down, air warm with summer, I felt something I hadn't in years. Pride. Not the loud kind. The quiet, grounded kind that comes when you know you've survived the storm and built something stronger from the wreckage. Sometimes, when I scroll through social media and see those cutting off toxic family threads, I catch myself typing replies, then deleting them, because honestly, there's no script for this kind of healing. Everyone's journey looks different, but if I had to say one thing, it'd be this. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. Staying just to keep the peace, that's what breaks you. I still have that old note Miles left me the first night I stayed on his couch. Blankets are clean, food in the fridge, sleep well. It's taped to my fridge now, yellowed at the corners, a reminder that kindness doesn't have to hurt, that peace doesn't have to be earned. So yeah, maybe my family lost a daughter they could control, but I gained a life I could actually live. And if you ask me, that's not revenge, that's redemption. Looking back now, I realize that the hardest part wasn't walking away. It was learning that I was allowed to. For years, I mistook endurance for love and silence for peace. I thought if I just kept fixing things, kept being the good one, eventually someone would see my worth. But life doesn't reward quiet suffering. It rewards courage. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop showing up for people who never show up for you. It took losing everything I thought defined me, family, home, belonging, to understand that self-respect isn't built on other people's approval. It's built on boundaries. You can love people and still refuse to let them break you. You can forgive them without reopening the door. And when you finally let go of trying to rewrite their story, you get to start living yours. People love to say, blood is thicker than water. But what they forget is, loyalty without respect is just chains. And sometimes, family isn't who shares your DNA. It's who hands you a clean blanket when you've got nowhere left to go. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that peace doesn't come when everyone apologizes. It comes when you stop needing them to. They finally reached out months later. I didn't ignore them, but I didn't rush back either. I forgave them, but this time on my terms. So tell me, have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved just to save yourself? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments. And if this hit home for you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and stick around for more stories that remind us what real strength looks like. Quiet, honest, and free. Take care of yourself tonight. You've earned your peace.